So next up, we have Jason Karl, professor at the University of Idaho. Been involved with the AIM program for quite a number of years now in different capacities. And Jason is going to talk to us about some of the challenges and opportunities of making data-driven management decisions.
Thank you, Scott. Sorry, I want to turn a timer on so that I don't keep you here all day, because I'm an academic now, so I could stand up here and talk for the rest of the day. Yeah, let's see. Here we go. Okay, so I was asked to talk about challenges and opportunities relative to monitoring, to standardized monitoring, largely with AIM. I think as a way to kind of start to wrap up and summarize the discussions that we've had today, the presentations that we've seen before, and I appreciate everybody. This is sort of the tail end of the conference, the last day, so thanks for sticking around. Before we get into the challenges associated with standardized monitoring, I wanted to take a second and step back and just talk for a second about what we've accomplished with AIM and some of the successes that we've had, because I'm afraid that this could turn into a Debbie Downer sort of like discussion, right? And I don't think that that's the case. I think we've accomplished some pretty amazing things. We've tended to focus on how many points we put out on the ground and the sort of the collective value and the applications of those data, but I think there are lots of other things that are almost just as important. One of which is the standardization of the methods that we've used and the sort of development of some really great resources for tightening and communicating those protocols to people, both for the terrestrial methods as well as for the aquatic methods. Melissa talked about the efforts we're going to, or the efforts that are ongoing at sort of doing the same thing for lentic monitoring. I'd like to point to the amazing training. I think to me it's a top-notch trainings that have been put together that are producing whole cadres of highly skilled technicians to collect these data. And the cool part about it is, to me, is to see these people go from field crews and collecting data to working for the BLM or going to grad school and sort of continuing their education, their contribution to this field. And I think that is just a phenomenal success from this program. And I think just as a whole, over the course of the last 8-9 years that I've been involved with AIM, to see the BLM come from where, I guess this is me and my perspective, is kind of back of the pack maybe in terms of monitoring success and monitoring effort, to a national and maybe even international leader in natural resource monitoring, I think is a really commendable outcome of this. So let's start kind of at this sort of foundational level again and talk about adaptive management. And historically, adaptive management has really been sort of a one-directional street, right, where we get a great idea, we gin something up, and we go out on the ground and we do it, and then we're on to the next idea, right? And the spirit of adaptive management is that we learn from those activities so that we can do better at them in the future, and that learning concept is really monitoring. And I think there wouldn't be a lot of argument that historically we've not done a very good job at sort of completing the circle here, right? We've seen some great examples today, though, of where people are completing the loop and starting to use or improving the use of monitoring data within management decision-making. That said, there are some, I think, sort of perennial challenges that we need to address in order to kind of solidify this, right, and to make this a more effective process. So what I wanted to kind of do today is just pick a handful of those. There's no way that this kind of talk could be comprehensive in listing all the challenges, and I think that would probably be quite depressing too. I just picked a few things to talk about here. The first is disconnect between what we do for monitoring and what we need for management. And I think that manifests itself in a number of different ways, one of which is in how we actually start the monitoring process in specifying our monitoring objectives, and the sort of following on from that is how we match the monitoring data that we collect to the management workflows, right? So the actual decision-making process. The second one I want to talk about is how do we interpret monitoring results that we get to actually make them useful. Third, we'll look a little bit at how to tell if change has actually occurred. We'll talk a little bit about this tension between having a general approach to monitoring and a very specific approach to monitoring around very specific needs. And then finally, we'll talk about integrating different sources of monitoring data. I'm going to do all of this kind of within the context of AIM and the AIM program, but these are, I think, broader ideas that all sorts of monitoring programs face. So my daughter and my 6-year-old daughter and I are reading Alice's Adventures in Wonderland right now, and just the other day we came across this little interchange with the Cheshire Cat. I obviously took some license with this, but I think it's instructive to talk about monitoring objectives and the difficulty that we have in creating monitoring objectives. The presentations from earlier in the day kind of alluded to this, but this is an area where we have struggled with the AIM program over the years in encouraging and sometimes cajoling and threatening people into creating specific and actionable monitoring objectives. And I think that there's a number of reasons why this has continued to be a problem. I think one is it's just a difficult process to begin with, to sit down and actually think about what it is that we need to know and to be able to quantify to the level to which we need to know that. And then the other sort of idea or thought that we've run into is that there's sometimes an unwillingness to commit to some specific objective because of the perception that it will pin you in, that you won't be able to have flexibility or you'll be held accountable to something that you may regret later on, right? And there's no silver bullet to any of those situations, I think. At least I haven't seen one to date. But I think that the opportunity here is to build on the experiences and the successes that these AIM projects have had in doing this and sort of demonstrating that to other people and sort of help encourage them to develop these monitoring objectives. So that's kind of one challenge. The second is how do we actually take then these monitoring data and fold them into management decisions? And I pulled the graph on the left from a presentation that I gave on AIM from some AIM data in 2013. And I purposely did not label the x-axis here to protect the guilty, which in this case is me, in sort of how we presented these data, right? And so this is average sagebrush cover in 2 different reporting units. And I guess I would just sort of ask the question, like, what does that mean? Like from a management standpoint, what value does that information have? And I guess to me, it's very little, right? Because these reporting units are large and they're heterogeneous, and we know that. And we don't manage by average sagebrush cover in a 10,000-acre area, right? And so we've spent a lot of time in AIM, and there's been a number of iterations of this and false starts and aborted attempts. But we think that we've gotten to a situation where we can present these data, monitoring data, in a means or in a way that's more actionable for management. So talk about what proportion of a landscape or reporting unit is meeting or not meeting some sort of management objective. And if there's a goal or a target, threshold, I can't remember the term we're using for this now because we keep changing it. If there is a target in mind here, then we can say, yes, we are meeting that, we're okay. No, we're not meeting that. We need to take some sort of corrective action. Okay, so it's the same data, the same monitoring data. We've just presented it in a different way that happens to sort of integrate better with the kinds of decisions that need to be made. And so to me, the opportunity associated with this challenge is just to keep moving this forward and to keep learning by these projects that we engage in and sort of collecting and documenting that process to make the data that we collect more actionable and more useful. The third challenge then is how do we interpret the data that we get? And so we can collect data on any number of indicators. I just put up a map of bare ground, here for a reporting unit in southern Idaho. But it doesn't do us any good to know how much bare ground there is unless we can say if it's too much or if it's not enough, right? And this highlights to me the importance of understanding site potential. What is this land capable of producing, and what is the appropriate amount of bare ground for the type of land that this is? And the challenge that we've had with this is that there are a number of options and opportunities for doing this, but they are varied and incomplete, and in some cases yet to be sort of fully fleshed out and validated. So we have information sources like some indicators we can derive from specific resources or research. In this case, sage grouse gives us a set of indicators to be able to interpret for suitable habitat. We can take empirical approaches where we actually mine the data that we have and look how we are falling out relative to all the other sites we have. We can put our look at our sort of monitoring data relative to a reference network or reference sites to determine if we are in line with, some sort of undisturbed condition would be an option. There's been a lot of talk about state and transition models and the utility of those for helping us, one, select indicators for monitoring, and two, sort of being able to interpret changes in those indicators relative to states that may be desirable or undesirable. And then there's model-based approaches here where we can look at, what we should have or what's predicted to occur on a site versus what we do have and create some composite scores from that. So I'm actually encouraged by this. We have a lot of opportunities for addressing this particular challenge, but I think that the larger challenge here is going to be in creating a comprehensive enough set of these resources that we can use, say, across rangelands, right, rather than having to rely on one in one place and another in another. The next challenge is figuring out whether or not change has occurred. And this is not a new challenge. We face this continually, right? But I think it's become maybe a little bit more relevant or maybe a little bit more evident, right? So if we have a situation like this where we have an estimated percentage of a landscape that is meeting a condition, and our target there is that red line, I think most of us would be pretty comfortable in saying that we met that target, right? And I think most of us would probably be pretty confident in saying we didn't there, but maybe we're close, right? But what about that? What does that mean? Did we meet it? Did we not, right? I mean, the implication here is that we don't have enough data, right? But that's all well and good to say. And, if you want to be a statistician that doesn't have a lot of friends, then you can go ahead and say that. But the reality is we don't have the luxury a lot of times of addressing that situation. And that's the challenge, right? How do we work and make decisions that are data-based and data-driven in low-power situations? And the BLM has a great sort of history of approaching this through a multiple lines of evidence kind of approach, right? Albeit informal. I think what AIM gives us now through the sort of collection of all of these projects that are happening is an opportunity to codify this approach, this multiple lines of evidence approach to increasing our confidence in being able to make decisions based on situations like this. Okay, the next one is this tension between having a general multi-purpose monitoring program and a very sort of parsimonious program around specific objectives. This is the model that the BLM has been pursuing for decades. That we'd have a specific land use or an objective or a question, and we define a program around that, and we target our indicators around that to be maximally efficient, right? The argument with AIM is that if we step back and we look at maybe how we can design monitoring that can address multiple objectives, that would buy us better opportunities in the long run, okay? We still continue to sort of chafe against this, right? And that programs have specific needs for data and times that they have to make decisions, and they're not finding the data that they need, or the data are not in the right spot or of the right type for a general monitoring approach, right, to satisfy their specific needs. And that's legitimate. That's a legit concern. And I think, though, that I would suggest that as we go forward, that this may in some part resolve itself. We just heard that we have now around 18,000 terrestrial monitoring points and 1,400 aquatic monitoring points. And so this is giving us a base of data from which to draw. And so if there are specific needs, maybe the place to start is here, and then supplement that as necessary. That's certainly an approach we've taken with the AIM program, and I think it presents a neat opportunity. The last challenge that I just want to highlight is how do we integrate monitoring data from different streams? We have field-based data that are really great on telling us, answering the how much question. We've got remote sensing data that are really great at answering the where question. We now have access to time series information through imagery that can answer a bit of the when question. How do we bring these together? There have been some neat talks this week that have done this, that have started to integrate these, but our challenge is to operationalize that, to make that much more formal, to make that a much deeper integration to inform management, and then to make that common practice. Just to wrap up, in conclusion, these are important challenges. They're not unique to AIM. Any monitoring program is facing these challenges. What's encouraging to me is that the momentum we've gained through AIM is giving us an opportunity to actually address some of these challenges rather than just complain about them. At the same time, though, rangelands are changing. Right? The uses of rangelands are diversifying, the character of the rangelands themselves are changing, and so we need robust and informative monitoring programs like AIM to help drive us forward, not only in terms of the quantity of the data that we collect, but also in terms of the structures that are put in place by the program itself. And certainly in this context, in this sort of political climate that we're in now, we need to find greater efficiencies in the monitoring data that we collect, and we need to actually make sure that we are taking the most advantage of these data, using them to the maximum extent possible for monitoring rangelands, and efforts that, like this sort of emerging outcomes-based grazing idea that's coming out now, are going to hinge on our ability to effectively monitor rangelands. And with that, I'll take any questions if there's time.
Time for a couple questions.
Everybody's tired. Alan? Yep. You need to be nice to me. You know that, right?
There's been a lot of talk of potential and the term, reference, and it's my opinion and position. The agency isn't required to manage for this definition of either historical or European or something, depending on how you use that term. So in the concept of a red line, this benchmark that we're just saying about, do you think there's
think in cases there are. I think we have a long way to go in other cases. But I point out that like the red line and the decision prior to the red line, which is how do you determine whether something is meeting or not meeting, right? Like, both of those decisions are actually a combination of a science decision and a management decision, right? So there has to be some information there on, say, like whether or not this spot of ground can support, say, South Habitat in the first place. But then beyond that, there needs to be that kind of management input of what is it that I really want to see here, right? So we've not really done a really great job in the past of being clear which is which, right? Which is a science decision or a science input, which is a management input. And what I really particularly like about that presentation, that graph with the red line on it, is that it helps make that distinction much more clear. Right? So, yeah. No, you're right. It is a wicket.
We should move on to our final talk of the day. Thank you, Jason.